Hey everyone, in this video we are going to talk about APIs and how to create an API using FastAPI in Python. So first of all, what is an API? An API or an application programming interface is a set of defined rules that explain how computers or applications communicate with one another. For example, when you use an application on your mobile phone, the application connects to the internet and sends data to a server. The server then retrieves that data, interprets it, performs the necessary actions, and sends it back to your phone. The application then interprets that data and presents you with the information you wanted in a readable way. This is what an application programming interface is. All of this happens via API. Now that we have understood what an API is, let's talk about FastAPI. FastAPI is a web framework for developing RESTful APIs in Python. It fully supports asynchronous programming and can run with Uvicorn and Unicorn. Uvicorn is a lightning-fast ASGI server implementation, where ASGI stands for Asynchronous Server Gateway Interface. We will first start by creating a basic FastAPI application. So, without any further ado, let's get started. First of all, let's look at the folder structure of our project. So, create a new file named main.py. This is the entry point of our application. We will be creating the API endpoints in this file. So, before we start coding, we need to make sure that we have all the required dependencies installed. In order to develop and run a FastAPI application, we need two packages. One is FastAPI and second one is Uvicorn. So let's head over to the terminal and do that. So first of all, pip3 install FastAPI. As you can see, I have already installed it. Similarly, pip3 install Uvicorn. As you can see, this is also already installed. So make sure that you have these two packages installed in your system. So now, let's start coding. So first of all, head over to main.py. So let's start with the import statements. So from FastAPI, import FastAPI and path. Then let's initiate our application. So this app is going to be an object of type FastAPI. So now let's consider a simple example of school students. Let's create a JSON representation of the details of students. So here you can see that the student has an ID 1 and this is the object. So his name is Rahul, his age is 17 and his class is 12. So these are going to be the parameters and these are the values of this particular object. So next let's consider a student with ID 2 and let's say his name is going to be Rakshan and let's say he's of age 15 and he's in class 10th. So now we have the data ready. Now let's create the endpoints for retrieving the data based on different scenarios. So first of all, let's look at the base case, which is going to be the index. So the name of this function is going to be index. So when the first index part of this API is called or is opened, then we need to show some default message. So here let's say the default message is going to be Ayush. So next, let's say that we want to get the data of a particular student who has a particular ID. So we want to retrieve the data based on the IDs present here. As you can see in our data, we have two IDs, which is 1 and 2. So if you want to retrieve the data based on this, let's see how the endpoint should be designed. So let's call it get students slash and then the student ID. So the name of this function is going to be get students, which is going to have a parameter called student ID of type integer. And here we are going to do something really interesting. We are going to make use of the path class and we are going to pass some arguments to its constructor. So first argument is going to be none, and then we are going to have some description about this particular endpoint. So this is going to retrieve the data based on the ID. So what we are going to say is the ID of the student we want to view. Okay. So after this, we are going to define one more thing called GT, which is 0. So what this means is that the student ID should not be negative at all. So it should always be greater than 0. So this is used for that validation. So let's return the student's data based on condition. So we are going to return the student ID if this particular student ID that we are interested in is present in that student's list. So if this condition is true, then we are going to retrieve the data. If this is false, then we are going to display an error message. And the error message is going to be the data for ID is not present. Okay, and we are going to make use of the format student ID. So based on this condition, we will have this value. So now that we are done with the second endpoint, let's move on to the third one. Now in this case, suppose we are interested in getting the data based on the name of the student. So let's say the endpoint is going to be get by name. Here we have a parameter called name, which is of type string, and we are going to initialize it to none. So before we move on any further, you would have noticed that the structure of these two endpoints are entirely different. So here you can see that we have used path parameter. So the argument is present in the path itself. Whereas in this case, we are going to go with query parameters. So which is of this format. So we have the main URL here, and then we have our endpoint, which is get by name here. And then we are going to say if name is equal to some particular value, say John. So this is query parameter. So based on that, what we are going to do is we are going to traverse each student's ID in our list of student objects, and we are going to check if a student with that ID has that particular name which is passed as argument. So if this condition is true, then what you're going to do is simply return that particular student's data. Suppose if this condition is false, that means if that name is not present, then we are going to say data not found. And then lastly, we have a very simple case in which we are going to return all the data related to the students. So this is going to be called getStudents, and then the name of the function is also going to be getStudents, and it's not going to have any arguments, and we are going to simply return the students object list. So now let's see this in action. So in order to launch the application, you need to open the terminal and type in uvicorn main, which is the name of the application, main.py, and then we have the object, which is app, and then reload. So you can see that the application is live on this local host with port number as 8000. So if you follow this particular link, so you can see that in the index part we have the default data which we want to be displayed, which is name Ayush. So if I try the different scenarios that we have looked into, so let us start with get student with a particular ID, say 1. So if I change the URL to this, then that particular endpoint is called and we have the data of Rahul, whose ID is 1. If suppose I give some ID which is not present in our data, say suppose 10, then we will be getting this error, which is the data for ID 10 is not present. So which is absolutely right. So now that we have touched upon this scenario, let's look at the second scenario, which is getting the data based on name. So we are going to say get by name, question mark, name is equal to. So here you can see this is a query parameter and the previous one was path parameter. So here say the name is going to be Rahul, which we know that is present in our data. So the data of Rahul is retrieved. Suppose if I give some name which is not at all present in our data set, say Peter, then we can see that the data is not found for that particular user. And last but not least, we have the simplest of all cases, which is just retrieving all the student list, which is going to give both the students' data and our JSON representation. So that's it. We have successfully created our first API using FastAPI. The code to this will be published on GitHub and the link to the same will be present in the description below. So make sure to check it out. So that's it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like this video and share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. With that being said, I will see you in the next one.